All right. So this presentation today is not necessarily a fun one, but it's a topic that I think should be discussed and talked about. So I'll be taking questions after the webinar. I do think that a lot of people can certainly read lots of articles about it. Over the 20 plus years I've been a recruiter, certainly 20 plus years ago, I represented people. I'm always following up with them and checking up on them because that's my job. I place people and then I want to see how they're doing and follow up. Generally, I try to check in with, even though there's thousands of people that I placed, I keep files and I look at people that I worked with a long time ago and see what's happened to them. There's a couple interesting points. And one of the things that's interesting is just if you've ever used a placement firm, but a lot of the people that I do place end up staying at the same firm for a long period of time compared to other people, but which I think is a good thing. But a lot of them, they're also tend to be in law firms as opposed to going in-house in the government because I place people in law firms. And 20 plus years ago, the only people that were really placeable by recruiters were the people that were the absolute kind of most law firm qualified type attorneys for the biggest firms. And now I place people in not just large law firms, but in small law firms and in pretty much every practice area. It doesn't matter. The markets just change. But back then I was placing people primarily only in large firms from big schools and things. So this is kind of what's framing what I'm going to be talking to you about today is really related to those attorneys. But a lot of these attorneys I placed when they were in their mid to early 20s. And several years on, I started realizing that a lot of the people that I had placed were dying. And it wasn't just that I'd placed them. It was that people that were even in our database signed up that were good candidates and things I noticed were dying and often in their late 30s and early 40s. And I would look them up. And a lot of times they died of heart attacks, cancer, and various things like that. And it seemed to me that it was an incident that was much higher than you would see in the general population. I had one time when I was looking up these candidates and reviewing everything one time a year. And then I'd search and find obituaries online. And I noticed I had two candidates that died when they were on vacation. One of them was in Skadden, I think, and had a heart attack in an airport. And another was at Baker Botts and had gone home. These are partners and to visit his family and had a heart attack. And it seemed odd. It's almost as if once they got out of this kind of routine of being in the office or whatever, took a vacation, their bodies just broke down and they died. And a lot of these people were in their late 30s, early 40s, and I'd find their information on Google obituaries. And it's not to say that people in other professions, of course, don't have these same issues, but I certainly come across and work with people in a lot of different industries, whether it's marketing and accounting and different things. And I do believe that I've seen a lot more of this than normal. A lot of these obituaries would talk about people's personal life, the thing about how they like their children and spending time outdoors and other hobbies. I always found that interesting that these obituaries would talk about this when the people that I knew spent as much time doing that because they were really working very hard all the time. Most of these obituaries were for people that were in large cities, tended to be a lot of them in New York, Los Angeles, and other kind of big San Francisco and other big markets. Certainly I had candidates in all sorts of markets, but these were the markets that I noticed most of it with. And so I do think that, and I'll just be completely clear about this, I think that for many people, young attorneys that are getting started inside of the practice of law, I think that working in a law firm, depending on how you approach it, meaning it's not going to do this to everyone. It's not to say that law firms are evil. It's just the role that attorneys play in society and the role that a law firm plays for its clients, just as other professions, things can hurt you. I think that working in a law firm can often age and kill people fairly dramatically, often quite prematurely and often quite drastically. I run into people all the time that I knew a long time ago when I was practicing law. Many do not look healthy. They often have a lot of stress-related things and they look prematurely aged, not as healthy as they might be. Now, that's not to say that this happens to everyone because it doesn't. And a lot of people thrive in a legal environment. And it probably has the opposite effect, making them more healthy because they get strength from it. But in a fairly consistent manner, a lot of people that I've seen, it does seem to do quite a lot to them. And stress can be very significant for people. And I'm going to talk about that today, what it does. I'm not saying, again, it does it to everyone. And I'm not saying it has to be you, but I would say that as a general rule, it can be very stressful for people. And regardless of their income and regardless of their status inside of a law firm, I've seen lots of people that I no longer recognize when I see them. I may have known them 20 plus years ago. they just change and it's not good. And it's not always the case. But what I'm talking about today is observational in nature. It's not to say that this is going to happen to everyone. It's not to say that practicing law is evil, but it is to say that it can, depending on you and what the environment does to you, can hurt you. A lot of this goes to the fact that attorneys, I think that in the role of an attorney, you're always trying to please your firm, you're always trying to please your clients, and really you never get there. So you keep working harder and you keep trying different things, and the stress just continually builds up. Attorneys are selected for the profession based on your ability to get good grades and then get into good law firms and then survive there. It's often not that healthy for people to sit in an office or a chair for a few thousand hours a year. It can be bad for you. There's lots of studies about that. And that's when you're billing hours and paid that way, that's what you do. Many attorneys, of course, do not sleep enough. That's also not healthy. Not sleeping can definitely prematurely age you. It can cause psychological problems. Not exercising can often do the same thing. A lot of times, there's very few people in firms that often have the time for that. It's often very unhealthy in firms. People just are snacking and stuff all the time. And then there's also a psychological component to it that while you're trying to please your firm and doing all these things and abusing your body and not doing good things, your family's often upset with you because you don't see them enough. You're just in a position where you're working and you have to concentrate and you don't want to be interrupted and you have deadlines. And then you're also in a position many times where attorneys are very nervous about sharing any weakness with their peers and even other people, because if they do, people will use them against them and that sort of thing, which is not pleasant as well. And then to cope with this, of course, it's always been the case. It's no different now than it ever was. Attorneys will drink alcohol or use other substances, whether it's cocaine or methamphetamines or uppers or downers or all sorts of things. And that's very common. I've known lots of attorneys in major firms that have had problems with very hard drugs. When I say crystal meth, and which for some reason used to be very common, or cocaine and all these sorts of things, and they use that for productivity purposes. But then, of course, that can always goes off the rails. And some people can manage substances that they abuse, like alcohol or whatever, or pot, or it doesn't matter. But it often is very difficult because it can catch up with you. A lot of times people have a lot of mental health problems that are caused by their inability to compartmentalize and really make the most of what they're doing, or to advance, or feeling like they're not achieving what they want to. And all these sorts of things can be difficult. And I'm not the first to say that. I'm very sympathetic to it. One of my driving forces of my career has always been to write articles and talk about these sort of things, because there's really not a lot of people that do. Not only that, but as a recruiter, I try to find people, not just large firms where, again, a lot of people are very well suited and thrive, but also smaller firms and smaller markets and things where this isn't emphasized as much. But the winning in the law can often really drive people crazy. So the only way to win for an associate and to be considered a superstar is often to bill more hours. Billing more hours, of course, has a price, because the price is your health, it's your relationships outside of work. And then it can often be your sanity. And then if you don't get the bonus you want, that hurts. The price for partners is often the winning, is bringing in clients and clients that other people don't have, getting them to bill hours, billing more than your peers. But all this stuff, depending on how much you bill, and it can often create problems. It was funny that one of the first firms I was in had maybe 25 or 30 partners at the time. But the crazy thing is with the exception of one guy that was from a devout Mormon background, which I don't know that there's a coincidence to that, but everybody had been divorced, all the partners. It's interesting. So there's a price for this. And it may not be that, maybe it's just a coincidence that everyone's divorced, but I thought it was something. Still, people that are going to be dissatisfied with you for not being around or having to work, even though you may be providing very well for them financially. Your family often may not be happy with you. There's often not as much winning going on as you'd like. Your life can be filled with exhaustion, dread, criticism, and work that often may signify nothing. And so this is just, and again, this is the introduction to this presentation, but this is just a kind of a note that it's important to really keep all this in mind, because if everything is about your job and the stress, it can be very hard and people suffer from it. All these things that kill people and hurt them, I believe, are often caused by a desire to achieve and succeed in an environment where it can be very difficult and where the price is very high. You can take stress and you can take punishment from criticism, and you can certainly not work as many hours. You can certainly not sleep as much, but that all has a price. It'll have a price on your body and it'll also have a price in your mind if you're not managing it well or if you're not in the right environment. So that's the problem. It's not to say that doctors don't experience stress and things, but it's often very isolating for attorneys because a lot of this you have to go through alone and you don't have other attorneys aren't supportive of you. They're competitive with you. Your clients aren't supportive with you because they need work. Your family doesn't understand the pressures that you're dealing with. So it can be very difficult. Sometimes it may not make sense for you. What's important, you may find yourself, unfortunately, living a life that has very little meaning that you don't enjoy. And I bring all this up just because I feel very badly. A lot of the people that I admired very much ended up for being superstars in law firms, whether they were people that I worked with or candidates because they were successful in terms of doing what was expected of them. A lot of them dead 10, 15 years from this. So every day goes that you're participating and you're putting yourself in a bad situation that is hurting you is one you can't get back. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to practice law. That doesn't mean you don't have to practice law in a large law firm. That doesn't mean you can't be in a law firm. It doesn't mean any of those things, but it does mean that you have to understand and get perspective. And there's a lot of things out there in the world that you can do other than practice law if it's not making you happy or work in a certain type of city or firm. It doesn't have to be that way because giving of yourself should have, if you are giving to yourself, there's the words that you want should be there. And one of the things is, I think, causes a lot of this is attorneys are selected by the largest law firms based on their ability to play the game. The game means you please people that are giving grades or giving rewards, and you want to get ahead, you want to make money, and all these things. Is that the best use for that motivation? Would you be better off starting a business or would you be better off in a different type of firm? What happens a lot of times is the people that end up getting in the most trouble from all this are often the most likable people and the people that are most eager to please other people, really want to be liked and successful. And that really, I think, what hurts them. This is very serious and very sad, but it's putting yourself in this treadmill can be very dangerous for a lot of people. People do bounce back. You can get into other environments and do other things, end up being very happy, but you have to get some perspective. That's my introduction. I'll talk about some of the ways in a little more detail right now. I don't want to be such a bummer with all this, but it's something that I just see and I've seen repeatedly, and especially where I sit, it makes me sad because it's often the people that show the most potential and something's lost. So here's some of the ways being an attorney can age and hurt you. If you sit long hours, it's not really good for you. Most attorneys do sit a lot. You're often rewarded for how much time you sit at your desk. Most attorneys in the large law firms and law firms in general spend most of their time sitting. You do this when you're very young, and the more you sit, the better. You're often expected to sit all the time. I like the idea of people being able to work at home. You can use stand-up desk and things, which is actually much more preferable, and walking desk, which I think are cool. But there's just a lot of sitting, and that's what it's about. There's lots of studies on this, and I've read them. Really be walking around at least a little bit every couple hours because sitting is not good for you. This is just a thing where I was talking to someone in a 50-person law firm in Orange County, and I was like 7:30 at night talking to this person. He was telling me that there are 7 days a week and most of his associates is there on Friday night after 9. They like what they do. And that's good. And there's nothing wrong with liking what you do and being committed. Being there at 9 o'clock on a Friday night every night is not necessarily healthy. This is, again, not even a large law firm. This is a smaller law firm. There's just a lot of danger than sitting. There's a lot of health problems that can happen, obesity and all these different kind of things, blood sugar. And it's not, again, I'm sure you've seen this with a lot of people. It's not healthy and create a risk of cancer and death and a different cardiovascular disease and so forth. And this may explain part of the problem. I don't think the body is made to sit for long periods of time. So it's just something to be careful about. This just says that if you're sitting more than 8 hours a day, you're without doing any type of physical activity, your risk of dying from obesity is similar to the same thing that would happen if you were very overweight or you smoked. So that's not good. And again, sitting behind a desk is a requirement, and a lot of people don't exercise. So just this particular example, if you are sitting 8 hours a day and you're not exercising, it's really no different than being a smoker or having way too much body weight that's hurting your body. And there's all sorts of studies about this. And no one seems to really talk about them inside of law firms, of course, but because it's serious and it's something to think about. And so I at work, I try to break up my time by exercising at least once a day, and then also used a stand-up desk, like a walking desk before. I just think it's helpful for people to just, you have to, and because your health is important, and it's important for your family and for you in general, and you'll actually be much more effective when you're healthy than not healthy in terms of your mind and how things work. I don't want to get too much into this, but your brain functions on oxygen, and the only way to get oxygen to your brain, a lot of it is to exercise is helpful. There's just a lot of benefits to it, so I would recommend that. The other thing is the lack of sleep. A lot of people take trains. I talk to attorneys in New York. Some of them take the bus to a train. So they get on a bus really early and they wait for a bus, and then they take a bus to another train or something. And people a lot of times don't sleep a lot. And again, a lot of attorneys in Los Angeles, for example, I know lots of attorneys, including partners and people that own their own firms, that for whatever reason travel like an hour and a half each way to work. That's a lot of time in a car, and it makes it difficult to sleep. And then you get to work and there's a lot of fire drills and things, and you're judged by your hours. And a lot of times people don't sleep enough. It's very common inside of law firms, especially deadlines. I have some candidates, it's funny, that I talk to sometimes, and I'll notice that they just don't sound right when I'm talking to them. And then sure enough, like they pulled an all-nighter and working, and that's not good. And I used to have an attorney working for me that was, I don't know, I think he was from Wachtell, and he used to say that every time you pull one of those all-nighters, it's like taking a month off your life or something. I don't know, it's probably wrong, but you have to sleep. So there's just a lot of problems. I remember one of my first, it was funny, one of the first interviews I had was at a firm called Reardon and McKenzie in Los Angeles, and it was founded by an old mayor. And it was a kind of a big firm. I think it merged into another big firm. It was a big LA firm, and I was interviewing there, and they were trying to talk me out of going to some other big firm. I don't know what it's like, a Melbourne or something, and that I'd interviewed with. And I don't know if it was I don't know what firm it was, but they said the guy was like, that was interviewing, was like, my best friend was working there, and he'd been there for 2 days, and he was going home to take a shower, or 2 days and nights. He was going home to take a shower and flipped his car, and I don't know, and broke his legs and was in a wheelchair for 2 months or so. It was something like that. A broken collarbone, and which I thought was very funny. And then I knew other people have had issues with sleep, and it's just not good. It can cause all sorts of problems. There's a lot of issues with the problems that sleep can cause in terms of depression, anxiety, other health problems. Mental health issues can actually be caused by not getting enough sleep. I once knew a sleep doctor that said that a lot of psychological problems are just caused by lack of sleep, and they don't require medication or therapy or anything. It's just the person gets enough sleep, they're okay. And again, I don't care about weight, but it can certainly make you eat more and unhealthy and crave sugars and things. And if that's something that's not good, it can age your skin. And a lot of people, when they don't get enough sleep, a lot of times your skin actually kind of starts looking gray. And so it can really mess you up. It's not good. And puffy eyes and that sort of thing. And so again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of these things, but it also can make you more stressed. Your body's less able to deal with stress if you don't sleep as much because of cortisol, and it also can affect what's called human growth hormone, which is something that helps people, and it helps your muscle mass and your skin and bones and things. And so it's important, I guess, for helping that. So again, these are things, if you don't get enough sleep, it can actually double your risk of death. And that's certainly not a good thing either. And so a lot of attorneys have issues with lack of sleep. And the most successful attorneys, and tons of them, often do not sleep enough. And because there's deadlines and things. And when I was practicing law, I remember I once went to work on a Thursday morning and didn't return home until Sunday morning. And I was working the entire time, and it was certainly not a pleasant thing for me. And so that was just something to keep in mind. And that in large law firms, and you can do a bit of that, of course, when you're young and get away with it. And I'm not saying that It's the most important thing in the world, but you really should monitor your sleep. There's all sorts of things too, by the way, that I think are very important. There's different fitness things, like there's a Whoop watch, which I actually wear one, which is cool, which monitors my sleep. There's this thing called a Lumo. It's not a watch, a Lumo ring. I think maybe Apple Watches do it, but it is important to monitor your sleep, because the more sleep you get and the higher quality sleep you get, the better off you are. There's also ways to get better sleep. So some people take melatonin. It's not THC, but it's some sort of CBD or something. It's not CBD. It's some sort of thing that comes out of the cannabis leaf that people use to sleep. It doesn't get you high or anything. And then there's various ways that people are able to increase their sleep with eye mask and I hate earbuds that block out sounds and things. But it is very important. And the quality of your sleep often will affect the quality of your work, your decisions, how effective you are, your depression levels, your energy levels, all that you can do to increase the quality of your sleep as an attorney is really something that I believe personally is extremely important and can prolong your life and make you more effective at work. And so that's something I think that everyone should do. Exercising enough is also very important. A lot of attorneys don't exercise enough because they don't have the time. There's kind of two types of exercise. There's cardiovascular exercise, and then there's lifting weights. I once heard, I think Jerry Seinfeld talking about it. He was saying that one of the most important things for him is doing some sort of lifting weights a couple times, 2 or 3 times a week, that it helps make him more productive and write better jokes and helps his moods. I've heard other people say that. Cardiovascular exercise is also very important, but it's extremely important. And one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of the most successful attorneys out there, no, certainly not all of them, but are very committed to exercise, and they at least 3 or 4 days a week. Some of them swim, others run. I've known, again, the most successful attorneys that own their own firms or have big firms and stuff are often very committed to exercise now. And so I think that a lot of people miss it, that they're exercising, they're not spending time with their family and so forth, instead of exercising, they may relieve stress by drinking or abusing others. A lot of extremely successful people, not all of them, of course, but I know that, for example, Bob Iger gets up every day at 4:30 in the morning. He's the former and then new head of Disney, and lots of very successful attorneys that I've known really make sure that they're exercising every single day, and they try to do some sort of, whether lifting weights or cardiovascular exercise, they just make it a real priority, because it's an outlet for further stress, but it's also good for your body. It drives oxygen to your brain and makes you more effective. It helps your skin. And so there's so many benefits to it. And so if you don't exercise, it can help, you can gain weight, but it can also cause heart disease and high blood pressure and cholesterol and strokes, which are another thing that I've seen happen to a lot of attorneys. And I don't even know what metabolic syndrome is. I wrote it, but I don't know what it is. But I'm assuming that's something to do with slowing down your metabolism. It can cause cancer and things. Your bones, it's actually very good for your bones. When you lift weights and things, it helps your bone keep growing. It can also cause people tend to feel very good after they exercise. So if you don't exercise enough, you can often a lot of depression and anxiety. And so that is also something. So even if you're not like an athlete, there's nothing wrong with even walking an hour a day. There's all sorts of studies about the benefits of how much longer people live that just walk 10,000 steps a day, or I don't know the statistics, but there's so much out there on this. And I really will caution you to just make sure that you try to integrate this into your life, because it's very important and will make you a better attorney. You will have more energy to do more hours, even to be more effective when you work, and it will do all sorts of things for you, more time with your family. It is very important to take care of yourself and with that as well. And there's other types. I know that other people do other things. There's also meditation, which is very good for you. That is almost a form of exercise for your mind. Doing all these things is extremely important, because it will prolong your life and your ability to give more to the profession, and it will help you do better. And people, just as a general rule, and I don't know really the best way to say this, but people want to have people working for them that seem like they have a lot of energy and are vibrant and healthy, and you would too. So who would represent you? So just this can help all that, and it can be very good for you. So definitely recommend that. And then this is just some things about diets. There's a lot of studies, of course, about diets. People eat a lot more healthy today than they used to. It's very funny the way people used to eat, but I still do. Diets are often very unhealthy, and people are ordering all sorts of deliveries and things. But if you don't eat a healthy diet, meaning something rich in nutrients and so forth, it can cause all sorts of issues, which, again, I don't want to talk about tooth decay and high blood pressure and weight and cholesterol, but all these things can happen with a bad diet. People feel a lot better can cause cancers and depression and all sorts of things. I often tell the story because it's fun. I had this experience where I exercise every day, and I never realized how important the diet is to exercise. And I'm preaching something, so I'm not saying that I'm perfect with diet and things. But I remember the first time in LA, there was this food service that would deliver you these raw meals, which I guess raw is things that are not cooked, but they're all vegetables and vegetarian and things, and they would make different things. And I remember the first week I ordered it, after 2 or 3 days of eating it, I used to run like 5 miles a day. And then I was like, all of a sudden, then I'd be tired. And all of a sudden running 8 miles and just limitless energy and stuff. So I think it's your body gets more nutrients depending on how you eat. Now, I don't certainly eat that way all the time, but I do try to avoid things that are bad for you. And I'm not here to preach a certain type of diet, but it really can make a huge difference in your moods and your effectiveness and a lot of different things. And I've seen a lot of people, by coming up with new diets and ways of eating and things, become much more effective, much more energy. They look better in terms of their vitality and health, and can be helpful. Another hard thing about practicing law is that, and again, this is very common, that people's families are often feel neglected and treated and feel stress, and attorneys often miss kids' events, and they're often not home for dinner. They leave early and they're gone on weekends, and they spend a lot of time at the office. And because of this, they're often able to form unhealthy, ongoing relationships with their families. I saw a story this morning, I don't know, it was about Ted Cruz's daughter trying to commit suicide or something. He's a very successful attorney. He's obviously not practicing law anymore. He's a senator. But the point is that when you're not around, you're not spending time with your kids and your family and unable to nurture them, that can create problems too. And those problems are often other people's problems. If you're not spending time with your spouse, I used to hear all these stories about attorneys' wives cheating on them, and these are men's wives, I guess. But and it's sad because they're never around. And having the ability to maintain relationships with people and be there is important. And a lot of attorneys, I remember growing up and in Detroit, and some of the kids whose parents were at the biggest firms with the most trouble. And I'm assuming that was because maybe the parents didn't have time to raise them and spend time with them and that sort of thing. And so often, because the attorneys do not have good relationships, they will withdraw even more from their families and work even more, because that's where they have comfort as opposed to spending time with other people. And so that can create problems as well and to backfire. Marriages, like I said earlier, a lot of them fail. It's because people bring the stress home. You can't necessarily act out your anger when you're at work, so you may bring it home. And then in addition to that you're not spending time with your spouse, and they're not feeling loved and cared about. And so they think about better way of life where they have a partner that's around constantly. So these things can all happen. It's sad for children. Children may not, again, feel cared about or have people interested in them. And because you're more interested in your clients than them, they get attention by doing things that are improper, which are drugs, or forming early relationships with the opposite sex, the same sex, that are romantic. It's just all sorts of things can happen that are scary. And so regardless of whether or not you're not home enough, and if you're home, you're sleeping or tired, regardless of the money, your family may not feel supported and happy and cared about, and that can create problems. And then that can lead to divorces and stress and all sorts of other issues that money doesn't solve. I bring all this up, and these are very real things. And it's important to understand them, because it happens to an awful lot of people. And so it's just things to be aware of. And again, when I say a lot. And so I think that a lot of attorneys have other issues. I've just noticed this. I think when you're an attorney, you often can't speak about your problems, because if you do, that's considered a vulnerability and people will use it against you. And that's what happens. And this creates kind of a lack of connection with others. Job also can often be there are a lot of course, outgoing attorneys. So it's not necessarily an introvert type of thing, but the attorneys are often taught it's bad to be vulnerable. So if you project a weakness at work, it will often be used against you and reviews and all sorts of things. If you make your client, this is just part of the profession, because if you make your client look vulnerable, this can be used against your clients. It's remarkable, like how attorneys, when they're defending their clients in a transaction or whatever, they have to a straight face, even if they're asking for something that's ridiculous or trying to do something else. And that's just the way it is. And so attorneys are taught they can't make their clients vulnerable, and they often can't look vulnerable. Talking about your personal problems and projecting weaknesses is often not seen as a good thing. Now, people do it, but then it can work against you. A lot of what you suffer as an attorney is you suffer it alone and without help from others. Without being vulnerable, there's a lot of ego involved in being an attorney. There's a lot of people try to look at a certain type of way. And the problem is if you're not vulnerable and you don't talk about, it makes you unable to connect with others, and that can make you feel isolated. And being isolated and not feeling like you're supported by your peers and others can also lead to a lot of depression. There's a lot of studies done that this kind of develops for people in law school. When people first get into law school, they are often much happier, and then they come out and they have suddenly developed all these issues. And a lot of it is because of I don't know why it is, but I'm assuming it's because of the competitive nature of law school. And I don't know, and maybe because you're taught to not be vulnerable. I don't know. But people definitely feel very lonely, and it doesn't allow you to have a lot of social connections. So social connection is also much more difficult, meaning genuine social connection. Going out and drinking with people is, I guess, one form of social connection, but it's certainly a kind of more of a crude form. I'm talking about connecting in a really way. There's a book, Outliers, by Malcolm Gladwell, he discusses people who live in connected communities, and they're far less likely to experience health problems than those who are more isolated. It's interesting. There's these things called blue zones where people live the longest. And one of them is, age community and somewhere in California. And there's another one, I forget, a city in California where the Seventh-day Adventists live. But a lot of these people that live the longest and are the happiest and are part of groups that are connected, and they communicate with each other, and it's very interesting. So Sardinia is another one, and they always try to come back to the diet, but then they find out that the people are very connected as well. And so people that are in part of groups where they're connected and they have a social connection are much more less likely to feel isolated. And it's often very challenging for people to manage stress when they don't talk to others and they don't have people to provide us with support and love and understanding. And so you need that, and attorneys need that. And what's funny is I like doing these webinars, and what I'd really like to do would be to do kind of groups where people are able to talk and about the shared issues and stress of being an attorney, but people don't do that. And even on these calls, like if someone uses their name, I always tried not to answer using their name. I cut and paste their name, because attorneys are very nervous about showing any type of vulnerability, and it's just part of the profession, and it's sad, and it's okay, but it's what it is. And other professions, if you're an executives have groups where they go and they talk about how stressful their jobs are, and I'm certainly members of those. But the attorneys don't have anything like that, and because they're nervous about it, and it's for that reason. Even when they have psychological problems or substance abuse problems, a lot of them are reluctant to even get help because of the not wanting to feel vulnerable and have it used against them. And it is very vital to try to have groups. Religion is one thing. There's certainly sports teams, and you can go to different types of retreats and things, but that's where attorneys often really find a lot of happiness, is when they start getting involved in other types of groups where they're able to get a connection to other people and other perspectives, and really get outside yourself, because it's very difficult when you have all this chatter going on in your mind, and there's no one to talk about, no one to feel. It's not easy. And again, everyone's going through the same thing you are, and no one knows what they're doing, but it's tough. But if you're unable to connect with others, people will want a feeling connection. They often use substances to connect with that. That's why they're called spirits and alcohol or drugs or whatever. It's just part of it. And it's probably always been going on, and then self-medicate and all sorts of things. And that's just how people deal with it. But that's always not the answer. Most of the answer, by the way, comes through to all these problems, whether it's feeling depressed or sad or angry, or is figuring out groups and things that you can be part of that will give you some sort of connection with others, is really the crux of most types of self-help. If someone has a drug or alcohol problem, they go to rehab, and the rehab is basically sitting around with others talking about your feelings. Or they go to AA or NA, or because you sit around with others and you connect with others. And it's being with others that a lot of times will help you. And in terms of for an attorney, it can be being part of different groups or different interests and things outside of work, and that can help. This is just people drinking too much and substance abuse. It's a big deal. I would say the number is over 20% of just alcohol, but most people that have these issues do not get help. And the time that it requires to go to groups, the other things is often a lot. And so people don't do that, or they feel that they don't want to expose themselves and be vulnerable because they're in the legal market. With clients, you're portrayed as being in control and understanding everything and being in a position of power. And how would you possibly be willing to let your guard down and talk about issues that you have? There's articles all the time. If you just search for attorneys dying of substance abuse problems, if you search every time the people getting disbarred, always getting disbarred for doing things under the influence of substances. And there's always articles about attorneys dying from this. I have been contacted times for quotes and things about this, and which I typically, and this is just an attorney from Cooley Godward, which is a great firm. There's nothing wrong with the firm. It's just, this is lawyers facing heavy workloads and conflicts with their value system suitable when they enter law school, and they may use drugs, alcohol, and coke. They suffer disproportionately higher rates of mental health issues, which may provide access to prescription drugs. And I don't know. Anyway, but this is just a study not too long ago. It's more than 1 in 5 lawyers felt that drugs or alcohol, and 3 out of 4 reported that their hard use started after law school, which is interesting. You would think that it would be college and things, but it's law school. And a lot of people have excessive workloads and intense competition, and with like-minded perfectionists lead to long hours of study and create a lot of stress. I had a funny experience when I was in law school. I was studying with a friend of mine, and I was taking a break with him so he could go outside and smoke. And I didn't smoke, but I told him, I know something that's supposed to really help you study. And he said, what, Prozac? And I said, no. I was thinking of it was vitamin D or something, or some sort of thing to keep you awake or give you more energy. And he'd come from Harvard, and a lot of his friends had gone to Harvard Law School. And he said that everyone that he knew and that he'd gone to Harvard with and had gone there was using it to help them study, which I'm assuming now it would be people use, I don't know, whatever the ADE type drugs are and things, but it can create a lot of, and I'm not suggesting anyone use these things. I'm just saying, but it can create a lot of addictions and things. And people often will turn to alcohol and drugs and things to help them study. And then the pressure to work can be very difficult. You need to work even when you don't want to work. And it's a very hard profession for a lot of people. One thing I would say, and I really want to make this clear, because I do think it's important. A lot of people use drugs and alcohol and other things, and they use them excessively. The most successful attorneys, and I want to make this very clear, the very most successful attorneys and the ones that have the most long-term success are often don't fall victim to any of this. They're able to control things in a way that they're able to get energy from exercise and diets and things, as opposed to resulting to these things. And so I would say that a lot of this stuff is a trap. It looks good, but it often in the long run is not going to work. And I think that's an important point to understand, that people that rely on all these crutches. Now, I'm not saying that if you have a medical problem or some chemical imbalance, you shouldn't be doing certain things, but you have to be very careful with all this, because again, like I encounter and work with very successful attorneys that have built very good practices in the tens of millions of dollars. And almost without a doubt, those people they don't have serious substance abuse issues or anything. So it's just something to understand that even though it looks like a good way to get things done in the short term, it always ends up backfiring because most of the time you crash from it, or it just gets you, it's not worth it. And it's not going to, you can't do it in the long run. Again, this is alcohol addiction, which is just one thing. It's between 15 and 24%. The problem, and I don't want to get too much into it, but the problem with most substances, and alcohol is really one of them. And again, this is a webinar about you succeed in the practice of law, but I do want to make it pretty clear is alcohol, if for most people, is ultimately a very addictive substance. And same thing with cotton, which everyone knows is extremely addictive. It's heroin, not Harrison, but crystal meth, cocaine, all these substances are ultimately addicting. And alcohol is the same way. Even though it's a legal drug, eventually, if you use anything enough, your body becomes dependent on it, your mind becomes dependent on it. So these are things all to be very careful of. And just to realize that using these substances to cope will ultimately often backfire. And this is just alcohol. Again, there are plenty of people that use alcohol responsibly. My girlfriend, for example, for as long as I've known her, has a glass of champagne every night, and that's it. Just one glass, and she's perfectly happy. And I used to have an assistant that did the same thing. Every Friday night, she would have a glass of champagne. But for most people, things can be maybe even that alone is an addiction. It's funny when I remember spending a lot of time in Italy and Sardinia. And at lunch, they would bring out these pitchers of wine and things, and everyone would have a glass, and it was perfectly normal, or even two glasses. But they also have studied that even though people are drinking in a lot of these European countries, if you stop the alcohol, then they start going through all sorts of withdrawal and things. And so even though they're not getting drunk, that can be, and these are just things with alcohol. Alcohol, of course, is a depressant that can cause health disease and other things. A lot of the attorneys, by the way, that I do know that have died were using alcohol pretty hard. And so it's actually the fourth leading cause of death. So it can be dangerous. But also for some people, it's not. But the problem is it can cause stress. It can hurt your productivity and all sorts of things and create problems for you. And I knew a lot of attorneys that drank very hard and still do, or if they're alive, but a lot of them have already had cancer. I knew one that had a liver transplant. I knew a couple that have had heart attacks. And so that's quite a few. I think a lot of this is just people that would go home and drink every night and then needed to go to sleep or to kind of things. And again, it's not maybe the alcohol that killed them, maybe it's the job, but at the same time, it's just something to think about. And again, I'm not poo-pooing people for drinking. Lots of people drink and are perfectly fine with it. But the problem is when you mix it with a very stressful job, it can actually help in the short run, but in the long run, the dangers are, I think, vastly outweigh the benefits of it. And then this is just law firm billing practices may encourage people to be dishonest, I've seen a lot of people that would pad their billing. I remember when I was practicing, there was an attorney in the office next to me, and every 2 or 3 weeks, I would hear him listening to the previous 2 or 3 weeks of voicemail because he never wrote down his time. So he would reconstruct his estimate of what his hours were based on that. And that was funny. It was an example of that. And reconstructing his voicemail, and he would just estimate them, and then he would add time and things, and that's not necessarily the most honest thing. And then I've seen partners, of course, make up time that they didn't work at different firms, and in terms of overbilling the client by tens of thousands of dollars, and which was funny because I remember when I was working for a federal judge, I'd see people sentenced. We'd have all these bank robberies. And people would go to prison for 15 years for stealing $1,200 with a note and running away and getting caught 5 minutes later. And so you wonder about that. And of course, I don't think most attorneys are dishonest. As a matter of fact, I think the opposite is true. I think most of them are honest. But I know that a lot of people do pad their hours. And I think that the problem is if you're dishonest, that people know they're being dishonest. And because they know they're dishonest, then they will hurt themselves. So there's benefits to being honest. Benefits of being honest are people that tell the truth and are good to others and act reasonably and are trying to do things, those types of peers are generally linked to better health and physical wellness and lower stress and decreased cellular aging because you feel better about yourself. And that ends up coming across in terms of how you do at things. And it's just how it works. On the other hand, when you lie and you're selfish and you're cheating and you're doing bad things, infidelity or if it's bad for you, those can actually hurt. And lying, if that's bad, most people think that lying, being selfish, and infidelity are bad, and cheating. But these can have adverse health effects, meaning a bad health rate, blood pressure, all sorts of things, and then it hurt you. Most people that I know that are dishonest and cheat, it usually catches up with them somehow. It can catch up and not just getting caught, but they just they punish themselves. I don't know what it is, and if they have a conscience, and most people do. So again, if you're dishonest, you can hurt your brain, your body, your biology, a lot of things, and then it can actually, in the long run, hurt you quite a bit. And so that's just something to think about. And that's the problem, because a lot of attorneys put themselves in a position where they're daily lying. And so about their bills, but about their hours. And I think that can certainly catch up with you, because if you're lying there, it'll come over to other areas. And I think a lot of people, whether it's psychosomatic or whatever, will hurt themselves. And then this is just another thing about mental health and attorneys. I think that a lot of people that are in if you say that 25% of attorneys have substance abuse problems, 60% of them are likely to have mental health issues, and nearly 40% of law students and criminal litigation attorneys, I don't know why it's criminal litigation attorneys, maybe it's because of the people they represent, but suffer from depression. Those are pretty high. 32% have major depression, 13.4% have anxiety disorders, and 14.6% have bipolar disorders. So these are really amazing numbers if you think about them. Rather than talk a lot about other things, there was a report here by Hazelton, I guess, was 12,000, almost 13,000 people, and found that 28% and 19%, 23% were experiencing symptoms of depression, I guess, 20% depression, 19% anxiety, and 23% stress. And the attorneys are 3.6 times as likely to be depressed as people in other jobs. If you're an attorney or a law student, one of the things I would recommend would be thinking about these numbers and what you can do to not be part of them, because that's not good. It's not. If 1/3 of attorneys have major depressive disorder, that's scary. And I've seen a lot of attorneys with mental health issues. I had one attorney once. It was pretty funny. It was actually, I guess it was funny. He was one of these people that billed an incredible number of hours. Like, he billed 3,500 hours, and his firm said, "You billed the most of anybody. We're going to give you got the highest bonus of all the associates." And it was only like 5,000 more than anybody else's, but he was very proud of it. And then I saw the guy a couple of years later, and he was still working in the law firm. I don't know what happened to him, but he came over to my house and he was showing me all these websites that he'd started, and it was these pictures of like giant earth movers, and saying that he had a mining company, but he didn't really have a mining company. He was trying to pretend he had a mining company because it was going to help him raise, I don't know what he was doing, but I had these huge companies all over the world, and he'd come up and made up these websites, and he lost his mind. It was crazy. I don't know what it was. It was maybe a need to feel important, and he ended up not practicing law anymore. And I've seen him a few times since then, and he's not doing well. It's sad. I don't know what happened there. A lot of people in the legal environment, I think, want to feel important, and they don't get that kind of feedback. And they want to, I don't know, but it can create lots of mental issues. I knew one girl that was a very good attorney, but then it's sad. And lawyers are often criticized or either yelled at, they're put down by clients, judges, and others. That sort of negative feedback is not helpful. And if you come into a law firm or the legal environment with a big ego and you think you're a big deal, most law firms will very quickly disabuse you of that. And then if that's what you've relied on as a crutch your whole life, what do you have? And a lot of people are afraid of superior disapproval, then FaceTime and working late at night and so forth, it does end up, in some respects, you end up being like a prisoner, which is not necessarily the best. You're a prisoner to work. You don't have a lot of free time or sleep. You're required to do all sorts of different types of work that may appear meaningless to you. And if it's not perfect, you can lose your job or bad things can happen. You're undermined by your colleagues, often inside the firm and outside the firm, looking to undermine you. So if you have a client and you're representing them, other attorneys will try to make you look bad to your client. And then if you inside your own firm, people are often competitive with you and creating issues. And even if you're a partner in firms, the same thing happens. And you're under stress if to bring in business. And then you have to often cover your back all the time, and you're forced to be part of a system where you may believe you need to be dishonest to have the most hours, and then you're constantly required to be professional, and then your spouses may have problems with them and be dissatisfied with you because you're not in the office. And a lot of attorneys, their spouses divorce them, and because they'd rather have your money than just not have you around and unpleasant when you're there, then yeah, that's part of the problem, which is unfortunate. And again, it's depressing me talking about it, but it's what it is. And then this is just stuff about lack of sun is very important. Attorneys spend a lot of their time indoors. You're under fluorescent lights in large buildings, and you often emerge at night. Attorneys often get a lot less sunlight than they should. There's all sorts of problems that are related to not getting enough sun. The men are twice as likely to develop heart disease. It can also lead to vitamin D deficiency, which can cause breast cancer in women, prostate cancer in men, loss of memory, just schizophrenia and dementia. One of the things I would just say to everyone on this call, that I'm not a nutritionist by any stretch of the imagination, but vitamin D is something that it can really help you if you suffer from lack of energy or depression, or you're tired a lot and that sort of thing. It's often because of a vitamin D deficiency and sometimes B vitamins, but vitamin D is a big thing. It's very funny that I read a study that most people would be better off taking just vitamin D if they feel really run down and tired and depressed than they would be taking an antidepressant, because it's actually more effective and takes care of the problem. But again, I don't know if that's true or not. There's other things also, other vitamins that can be very helpful, but vitamin D is a big one and can create depression and mood swings and anxiety and all sorts of things. So it's just a recommendation to really make sure you do those sorts of things to help you. So the conclusions, that it can be a challenging job and it can hurt you. And a lot of it is just, it's not necessarily large firms who do it, but it's the legal profession in general. Everywhere an attorney turns, they're often assaulted by forces that can cause mature aging, create health problems and that sort of thing. And it can be exhausting, and it can be cruel, not only to your mind, but to your body. One of the things that this presentation that should have probably encompassed and had is that my recommendation to everyone is that you need to really put your physical and psychological health first, no matter what you do. And there are attorneys in every large firm that do that and carve out time and make sure that is a must. Certain things for certain people are a must. And that's not to say that you don't have to catch up on sleep on the weekends and other sorts of things. But my recommendation would be that you do make your these things a must. And so if you don't, no one is ever going to tell you in a law firm to stop working so hard and to take better care of yourself. No one's ever going to tell you that, that you're billing too many hours or that you're hurting yourself. And no one's ever going to tell you that you need social outlets and groups. And no one's ever going to tell you to stop abusing substances in private or however you're doing it. No one's ever going to tell you these things. And so you really need to prioritize what you can do to make yourself a better person and that sort of thing. So everybody that's ever become successful in anything has had goals for themselves, whether it's Elon Musk or anybody, and they have goals and they have certain limits and and they make those a priority. Now, if your goal is to be a partner in a law firm or whatever it is, all these things you can do, but you also need to make sure that you take care of yourself along the way and that you have outlets for doing so. I'd like to be able to provide everyone the best possible advice, but there's certain things that I think are important for attorneys to keep in mind. One is you need to be doing work in an environment
after your first 5 or 6 years of practice, meaning not right away, but after 5 or 6 years of practice, you should be in a job, in an environment where you're looking forward to work and where the work is actually enriching you and not taken away from you. And if that's not the case, then you should think about what you're doing. So 5 or 6 years in an apprenticeship, no one is going to tell an attorney, a doctor, for example, during a residency that it's pleasant working 24 hours a day. It's just how it works. Your first 5 or 6 years of being an attorney are really about learning a skill. And that doesn't have to be pleasant. And I'm not saying it should be, but after 5 or 6 years, you should start thinking about being in an environment that's going to make you happy in the long run. And why I say 5 or 6 years is it takes about 5 or 6 years to become a good attorney and to learn whatever practice area and so forth that you're doing. And that can be in a law firm, but the practice setting also is something that makes a big difference. If you look at the kind of the lives that a law professor leads as opposed to an attorney at a big firm, it couldn't be any different. And most law professors would not be happy in the law firm, but a lot of law firm attorneys wouldn't be happy being a law professor. You have to be in the right practice setting as well. So in terms of a couple of these things, you need to prioritize different types of aspects. You need to prioritize, I believe, I think that should be some point of everybody's should be doing. There should be some sort of outlet for that. Even if you're not a exercise type of person, you should do that. Most of the attorneys that I've known that didn't prioritize that ended up having a lot of problems or health problems and other things in the long run that there's no reason for. And so you need to prioritize that. I think you need to prioritize sleep. I think you need to prioritize your diet to some extent and what's good for you. I think you need to prioritize making sure that your vitamin levels and things are okay and high enough. And I think that's important. I think everybody should be prioritizing your social relationships with other people and outlets. And I think that's important to be able to feel like you have a group of people that you can talk about things with and where you can share other experiences and that you're integrating that into your life. And I think you need to prioritize, if you do have issues with substances, making sure that you do whatever you can to limit them or get them out of your life. And no matter how hard it is, I think that will also help your life. I think you also should prioritize your family and spending time with them and those sorts of relationships. And then also your psychological health. It's no surprise, by the way, that a lot of the most successful people out there, several that I know, always have, whether you call them professional coaches, which I have a professional coach that gives me insight into problems and things, and person happens to be an executive, a former executive, but everybody, you need outlets for people to talk to people about things. So some people, therapy, a lot of very successful people go to therapists, and some of the most successful people do. I have tons of successful attorneys that contact me for coaching and things all the time. And not really taking clients, but they do. And that's a very smart thing. And you need some outlet where you can talk to people about your problems and get some perspective, because most people suffer from the stuff alone and it eats them up inside. And so I think you also need that. And there's other things that are very helpful too. I think meditation can be very helpful. A lot of extremely successful people do that each day. I read articles all the time about very successful people doing that. So all these things need to be built into your repertoire. And these are all skills. Becoming very successful in meditation will make you very successful in managing your emotion. Becoming very successful in getting off substances will make you more successful in groups of people and vacations and all these things. That's my advice. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this is because I've just seen so many people not manage this stuff well. And it's terrible for their families and for them. And they suffer silently because of this stuff. And it doesn't have to be that way. And ultimately, one of the final things that I would say is I think that so many people are so concerned about their egos and how they look to others and success and money. And again, all that stuff has a place, and it does for a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with being concerned about that. But ultimately, the only thing that you have is your mental health and your psychological, your happiness, your relationships with others, your physical health and your social connections. And very few people, when they get older, ever feel like they didn't spend enough time in the office. And most of the things that you'll be grateful for
if you ever do gratitude lists and things about what to be happy about, are going to be about other people and things. They're not going to be possessions and achievements and things like that. So many people just suffer in silence, and I did want to spend a little time talking about that today. So I'll take a quick break, and then when I come back, I'll answer questions. The questions, by the way, don't have to be about this, because this is certainly not the happiest subject, but they can be about anything about your career or offers you're considering or anything like that. So be back in just a few minutes. Okay, here we go. So here we go. This is a good question. Some of these are fun. Thank you, by the way, for everyone who's asking these questions. Okay, first question, is there a way for attorneys to protect themselves from the health risk associated with lack of sunlight? What could be done to ensure that they get the necessary amount of vitamin D and sun exposure? How can these professionals stay healthy despite spending so much time indoors? One of the things that's interesting is there's what are called red light. So some people go to tanning booths. It was funny. I was at a big firm years ago doing talking about doing what is called a routine search. And I was asking about the head of the firm. And I was like, what are his interests? And there were a couple other people in the room, and they all looked at each other and they said tanning beds, which I thought was funny. A tanning bed in his house. And then I was actually working with another very successful attorney years ago. And she had a tanning bed in her house, which I thought was funny. And again, these are people in LA, so I don't know if it's that common, and I think tanning beds are actually dangerous. But in terms of tanning, there's something called red light therapy, which you can go, and there's plenty of places that have them just like that. And they're in every big city, and you can go into red lights, and those are supposed to be very good. They give you the same benefits as sunlight without the health risk and just being outside. And I don't know a lot about the risk of not getting sun, but I do know that it's something that I think that a lot of people do that it can be very helpful. I recommend making that part of your kind of routine. So sometimes people will do things like they'll go and maybe 1 hour a week or every month they'll just go in someplace and do it. And it can be I think it's just helpful. I'm sure tanning beds do the same thing, but I think tanning beds have been shown to be pretty dangerous. And I don't know, maybe they're safe now. I don't know, but it can be very helpful. Okay, let's see here. Next question. Give me 1 second. Okay. Can lawyers suffering from mental illness find success in their career? What measures can they take to manage their mental health concerns while pulling a successful career? Okay. So mental health, I'm not an expert in mental health. I think that I wish I was, but I'm not. I think in terms of mental health, I think there's different aspects of it. Most of the time that I've noticed, I think that most successful approaches to mental health and most of the happiest people, it's not necessarily always related to whatever the type of deficiencies of serotonin. I don't know how it works, but I think a lot of it is just due to people's need to be around other people and to be happy. It's interesting because I work in Malibu and there's all these free centers, and for not just for drugs, but for tired executives and everything. And they all basically, all they are is there's a lot to them. And I'm not an expert in the recovery industry, and I wouldn't even, but the major thing that everything does is just basically being around groups of other people and having other people to talk to and share with and learning lessons from others and that sort of thing. And it's the same thing that most types of recovery groups do, whether it's like AA or groups for people that have suffered accidents and other things. And it's all about having some sort of a support network, which I think the people traditionally would get from their families and then even in their communities. And so I think if you feel like you're suffering, that a lot of times one of the best things to do is to figure out a way you can be around other people. Certainly there are drugs and things that can numb whatever stuff you're suffering from. And if you're schizophrenic, I don't know what's a problem for me, but definitely things need to be medicated. But in most cases, it's about most of the cures, I think, that are about figuring out how to have a support group and being around other people. And which is something that most attorneys don't do, and it's very difficult to do at work. It's also sometimes very difficult if you're in a small market or in small towns, and that can be helpful as well. Okay, and also if you feel like you're suffering from mental illness, I would think that probably if you look at the statistics, I think most people to some extent a lot of people are having issues, and I think everybody can still be successful. I read stories about movie stars it's funny because I read the news and there are always stories about movie stars, all these people having meltdowns, and then they're suddenly back. And so I think that's no different than attorneys. Attorneys can have all sorts of problems and be back. And I was thinking about years ago, like Brad Pitt, like some crazy stuff he did. And then he's just got some new movie out, Bullet Train, and I was watching, and it's just people just come back after all these things. And a lot of them do, or most of them do actually. And so I think if you feel like you're having problems or you've had problems, you can always come back. It's just, what do you do with the problem? And in most cases, the issues that you have, the solution is going to come from connecting with other people, and it will take work. It's interesting, like a lot of people, by the way, with substance abuse problems that are depressed will go to psychologists, psychiatrists, and things. And really, a lot of times the problems are caused by the substance, not necessarily something else that needs help. Okay, what can an attorney do to maintain a good life balance with knowing the nature of the job? So to maintain a good life balance, all you need to do is you need to have priorities. Priorities are, if you want to
exercise each day, instead of going out to lunch, you exercise during lunch and then come back and maybe you do lunch at your desk while you're working or something. You figure out a way, or maybe you get up early, but you can definitely have a good work-life balance. Good work-life balance for some people. The reason that kind of has a bad connotation is when a lot of attorneys say that, it just means they don't want to work. But if you do want to work, actually having a good work-life balance with social activities and other things will actually make you much more effective as an attorney. You should strive to do that because you need to protect your physical and your mental health in order to do.
As well as in your job. Is it possible to become a lawyer if you have a history of mental illness? Yes, of course it is. You can definitely become a lawyer if you have a history of mental illness. If you have it's no different than having a history of physical illness. Of course, you can become an attorney if you have a history of mental illness. The issue is that a lot of things that used to be stigmatized are no longer stigmatized in society. And certainly mental illness is one of them, because most people know others that have had mental issues and have cured them and fixed them. I'm assuming most mental illness, again, I'm not an expert in any of this, but to the extent that things are fixable and can be corrected, it's perfectly fine. I've known lots of very high performing people that had what would seem to be extremely serious mental illnesses. That I'm thinking of several people I know that went to Harvard Law School and these kind of top schools and Stanford and other things. And then they were able to fix their problems with different types of methods. Sometimes it was medication, others it was other things. I think most things can definitely be fixed. There's nothing wrong with, I think, things that I've seen people fix these things all the time. And it's not definitely stigmatized the way that it used to be. And when I say used to be, it's just not really at all. And frankly, one of the things, the people that stigmatize this kind of stuff are often the ones that have the most serious problems and just aren't acknowledging them. Okay, so how can attorneys maintain a connection with others while avoiding vulnerability that could be used against them or their clients? Is it possible to remain emotionally healthy without being vulnerable? Yeah, so there's professional
relationships and there's personal relationships. And professional relationships, you definitely do not want to talk about certain things. You have to be very careful. In professional relationships, you don't want to talk about your sex life or your psychological issues or your substance abuse or your relationship problems or those sorts of things. Those need to be kept out of the professional ground. And a lot of times there's no guidelines for this, but if you talk about personal things, you typically, if you're sick, you say I'm ill. You don't have to say I have whatever STD or something. Just, you have to be very careful about keeping boundaries between your different types of things you do. So you can definitely do that. But just the difference between being professional or your professional persona and your persona, you have to keep that in mind. So yes, you can be emotionally healthy without being vulnerable, but you have to be very careful about that, because if you bring too much of your personal life into work, people get uncomfortable or people will potentially use it against you. And what kinds of things can be used against you? Just think about it. Your opinions about political matters could often be used against you. Your feelings about social matters could be used against you. Your feelings you just have to know what to do. But you certainly can remain emotionally healthy there. But you need people where you can talk about your physical, your types of things. Okay, here's a kind of interesting question. Oops, sorry. This question is, could you point to an article about do's and don'ts for Christian attorneys, or would you consider writing one yourself? Not right there. Thanks a lot in advance. I don't know of any articles about that, but I do think it's an interesting point. It was funny. I used to, I'm in Malibu, so I used to hire a lot of interns and from Pepperdine Law School, which is a Christian law school located in Malibu. And it was very interesting the way they approach problems. It was as if they weren't into necessarily hurting people, but bringing out the truth. I don't know. One of the funny things happened is we had this article that we were writing for a kind of a news publication. I asked one of them to proofread it. And it was it was funny because it was a legal article about an opera singer that was fired because she couldn't sing without passing gas, or loudly, because she had some sort of health problem. And so the Pepperdine attorney, law student, changed it to be she couldn't sing a song without a health problem. So she removed all the stuff about that she was passing loud gas or something when she was singing. So it was funny that they tried to make it like they didn't want to make her feel badly about herself. And I think that the idea would be that if you're approaching things from a certain point of view, it's not to say that a Christian would approach this any differently than someone that's Jewish. And in the Jewish religion, there's a concept where you're not supposed to really talk negatively about people unless you're talking to them directly, but spreading rumors and things. So every religion has versions of this. But if there's a way to do what you consider is the right thing,
that's probably the best thing to do. Let me just see here. Some more questions here. Okay, with the hectic and often unpredictable lifestyle of attorneys, how can they maintain a healthy diet that contributes to the overall physical and mental well-being? The biggest thing would just be to be aware of and be a student of all this and understand that what you put into your body does affect the energy levels you have and those sort of related things. But even I think some of the healthiest food is actually found in New York and in the biggest cities like Los Angeles. So I think you can often find a lot of the most healthy diets there, even in carryouts. Even 7-Eleven a lot of times has fruits and things, but understanding kind of what a healthy diet is important. And then once you're able to do that, I think sticking around those lines. I'm not a health expert, but I think one of the biggest things that does hurt people is sugars, and for a lot of people, meat's been linked to, and it's not maybe the meat that hurts them, but it's the hormones and things that are in meat that's linked to things. So just trying to be careful with that. Okay, how can lawyers, this is a good question. Again, your diet, and some people will go to a nutritionist and things, and just making it a priority, I think, is always a good idea. Okay, how can lawyers ensure their family still feel supported by long hours at the office? That's a great point. So one of the things I think that's important is your ability to text your family, talk to them, call them, show interest in them, ask about them, how they're doing, sit down with them each day and talk to them. That's very important, and people want to give feedback. One of the things that I think is very important for all relationships, whether it's with a significant other or your kids, is a lot of times families would have dinner together and they would talk about, and this is something Obama always made sure to do when he was at the White House with his family, but other people will do it as well. But sitting down and spending time with your kids on an ongoing basis and asking them on a consistent basis, if even every night or as often as you can, several times a week, asking them about their day, how their week's going, understand what's going on, trying to show up to games. They're seeing all those sorts of things are very important. Even if you're away, just checking in with your family and seeing how they're doing is important. I think that a lot of times people lose that connection, and then people believe that you don't care, and that they believe you don't care, then they will find outlets elsewhere. So I think it's with children and with significant others, if you're not maintaining that connection, they're going to find someone that will maintain that connection with them, which could be the wrong types of kids. It could be getting into sex and things earlier than they should. It could be social groups. Who knows? But that connection is extremely important. Okay, this is a funny question, but I'll answer this one. Not a funny, I don't mean it in a negative way, but what drives attorneys so many lawyers work themselves to an early grave, sacrificing the physical health in pursuit of success? I think a lot of it has to do with the atmosphere. The atmosphere of a law firm, which is sort of behavior, makes it, because it's in the law firm's best interest to have you bill hours and do all these things. That's really a lot of it is that. And lawyers are taught to succeed and be the best in whatever group they go into. And so this is just another way that kind of plays itself out. So I think that's one of the things that drives a lot of lawyers to do that. I think the desire to how they're seen by their peers. A lot of times people care very much about looking like a big deal in front of their peers and what their peers think of them. I had an interesting thing happen. I had a relative die, I guess, on Friday, and just found out about it yesterday. And the person didn't want anyone to know that they had
die. And so they left this note, don't tell anyone, don't. And so even in death, the person was almost protecting their ego from people not, I don't understand. And this is a distant relative. It wasn't someone I only met a couple times in my life. But I thought that was very interesting. But I think a lot of it is just you want people to say, oh, this person did this. And people care about what people think of them. And even when they get beyond the point where they care about what people think of them, they care about what they think of themselves. And they're motivated by competition. Certain people are just very motivated that way. And you almost have to become an attorney in a lot of firms, because you need to be able to get good grades and get into the big firm and stay there and do good work. So I think that's what drives a lot of people to do that. I think it's just the nature of it and how it works and the emphasis on that. And law firms, of course, make money the more hours you bill. So they create an atmosphere where that
is encouraged, or where the opposite of that isn't. And that's just their role. It's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's just how it works. And I don't think there's anything more than that. Okay, I think this is the majority of the questions. I think a lot of people asked some good questions, and I certainly appreciate them. If no one has any more, I'm going to just see here. There's a couple of things that are just statements. Okay. Well, I think that's it. I certainly appreciate everyone's questions today. I think it was I hope the webinar was helpful just in terms of the questions, and I hope it helps. We'll be back again next week, and thank you everyone for the questions today. And I hope you have a good rest of your week. Thanks. Bye.